transparency is the currency of trust. And without it, our democracy will die in darkness.
So let me point out, remind everybody, thank you, John, fantastic. John is one of the great heroes of the election protection movement and had a huge impact in Arizona. And Ken Bennett, who he mentioned, is a major Republican. Is he Speaker of the House or President of the Senate this time?
No, he wound up being believe it or not, he got education. He's the chairman, and the government committee is gone, and now it's elections, and he's in the vice chairman. In fact, that's why I was late, because I was in that committee watching it online, not about our bill, but other bills in election.
Okay, so if this bill passes the legislature, Ken Bennett is the highest ranking Republican we've had on these calls. If this gets through the Arizona legislature, which John will have a hand in, we can take it nationwide and make it a big piece of our election protection puzzle. And we'll have more on this, John, if you'll come back next week.
I will. And just in closing, the infrastructure is in place. It won't cost hard anything to do this, except they got to buy the inkjets and put it back into the high-speed scanners. Well, I think I know somebody will buy them for him, you know?
Well, we'll take up a collection and we'll start a national account at Staples so that people can buy inkjets for
marry the ballot to the image.
Thank you very much. So keep following us. John, you'll be back with us next week. Hopefully we'll have Ray McClendon, Andrea Miller. We will have a national organization, the Alliance for Grassroots Democracy, which is going to move as much money, resources, and human attention as possible to grassroots democracy over the next year and a half leading up to 2024. John, you're an integral part of that. Thank you so very much. We have with us now Camilla Reese. Camilla is somewhere in the wilds of Connecticut and is one of the great organizers on the issue of 5G, which is going to segue. She's with Tim Sheckley, who she's going to introduce, and we're going to segue that into the discussion, of the energy use of 5G, which people don't think about much, and B, the war on solar, which is escalating every day. I got to tell you, I saw on a right-wing site, it's hard to say this, they showed a picture of a wind turbine on top of a tower exploding, as if windmills are now a danger to explode around the United States. There's really no end to these people. But Camilla has had a very strong personal experience with 5G, has done amazing organizing on it. And one of the reasons for having her on is to integrate our various movements, especially on the environment, into the very real dangers of 5G and the avoidable problems and the alternatives that we have with 5G. So Camilla, please take it away. We're really glad to have you on.
Thank you very much, Harvey. And while I have focused on 5G and 4G and 3G and 2G, all the Gs, through my two websites, electromagnetichealth.org and Manhattan Neighbors for Safer Telecommunications, and through policy work done through the National Institute for Science, Law, and Public Policy in Washington, where Tim Sheckley, who you're going to hear from later, is a senior research fellow. Today, we're going to focus a little more on the smart grid. But before I go there, I want to have an update from Julie Levine regarding the decision on January 10th by the LA Board of Supervisors to approve changes to the county code that will allow faster rollout of wireless antennas throughout LA County. They unfortunately paid no attention to the 183 written comments, the 40 formal letters of opposition, the over 600 pages of studies and letters from scientists about the risks of these antennas, an action alert by Children's Health Defense, and a 28-page legal analysis by Fiber First LA regarding the importance of complying with the California Environmental Quality Act, which they chose not to do. There was one letter in favor of this accelerated rollout of antennas, which was from Verizon. They had a petition that had over 1,000 names on it in support of wireless networks. And they have been researching the signatories to that petition. So far, they haven't found one legitimate person. They found people, many people who were dead, going back many years, and other people whose name was on it that didn't know, that had never signed it. So it's very disturbing. Fiber First LA is going to be initiating legal action on this subject, and you'll hear more eventually from Julie Levine on this. In the meantime, if you want to be in touch with her, you can email her at 5gfreecalifornia@gmail.com, or her number is 661-548-6577. So that's an update on that.
Camilla, give me the website again, and I'll put it.
It's just an email address for Julie, 5gfreecalifornia@gmail.com.
Okay, that's in the chat now.
Okay, great.
Okay, go ahead, please.
Okay, so one of the I had the great fortune of meeting Dr. Tim Sheckley in Boulder many years ago when I was talking to somebody there who said that, well, you're saying that all these smart meters are dangerous, and Tim Sheckley is saying that they don't do what they're being claimed to do in terms of creating a true smart grid or integrating renewable energy technology. So we exposed that in a paper that was called Getting Smarter About the Smart Grid 10 years ago. You could look at that at gettingsmarteraboutthesmartgrid.org. And it explained that a true smart grid would be able to integrate distributed renewable energy. And explained the conflicts of interest in the business model of the big utilities that they have no incentive to use less electricity, and yet strong incentives because they get to invest in large capital equipment assets like generation and transmission and meter networks, because they get a guaranteed rate of return on their capital investments. So basically, this paper showed that we have been misled, the whole country, everywhere they're putting in the meters today, and then has been misled about the potential energy and cost savings of the smart meters, just like we've been misled about the adequacy of wireless networks, which is another subject. We've also done a paper on that called Reinventing Wires. So the paper said that leadership is going to come from outside of the centralized model. And today we're going to hear from the leadership of Tim Sheckley, who is an energy systems engineer and an expert in international standards for the smart grid and home electronic systems. And he has been working on a technology that will allow for microgrids and basically renewable energy, locally controlled, locally resilient, community-based, decentralized, et cetera. And it's very exciting because it's instead of going up and trying to change the current system, it is creating a better alternative. And they've got a couple locations in Colorado and in New Mexico where they're demonstration projects that are going to start. He's applied for a $12 million grant from the Department of Energy to accelerate the progress on this. But it gives me great hope because it also allows for wired metering, and no radio frequency exposures. So I welcome you, Tim, and thank you for being here with us. And why don't you take it away?
Okay.
Oh, there you are. Good.
Thank you, Camilla. Well, I think you teed it up very well. What I'm going to talk a little bit about is where we go next with this. The smart meter. It goes back to I was one of the people that was involved in developing the original standards for it, which was back in the early 1990s. So they call it AMI, Advanced Metering Infrastructure, but that's a little ironic because it was advanced maybe in 1990, but it's no longer appropriate. So basically what I've been working on for quite a few years and getting finally published is some standards for the next generation smart meter, and that would really do what the original concept was supposed to be, but got really twisted by the electric power industry, and particularly in 2008 with the a financial crisis then, and the money that was thrown at the smart meters, it became totally distorted into something else that did not do what it was promising to do, and still doesn't do any of what is claimed by the utilities. Basically, the purpose of a smart meter is to measure, to manage energy on the premises, to measure and manage. And that's what the original prototypes that we developed did. And I did this development work for people like Southern Cal Edison, and in the 1990s, Duke Power, Northern States Power, Florida Power. A lot of these companies supported this work, but it was all low-key backrooms kind of stuff. And it didn't come mainstream until decades later with the in 2008 mainly. What ended up in the smart meter is not what we planned on, not what was important, because the meters just measure and transmit the data to usually by radio to the utility. That doesn't do any good at all. That doesn't manage energy. Despite what they say, it doesn't work, and it's never worked. And there's plenty of documentation of that now. But we've developed a new version that we call EMA, Energy Management and Measuring System. And it's really a home, what we call a home energy management system, or for homes and buildings. We developed this in the international ISO and IEC, International Standards Organization and International Electrotechnical Commission sponsor a standards committee called Home Electronic System. And I've been involved in that for many years. And we have a lot of momentum now trying to solve this problem and we've developed a set of standards, probably over 50 standards by now, and some of which are the latest ones are dealing with this particular system. It's called the HES Gateway, Home Electronic System Gateway. It's a device that interconnects the devices in your house to each other and to external services, but it is primarily focused on preserving several points: user privacy, cybersecurity, safety, interoperability of products, and most importantly, it's a hardwired system. It uses optical fiber and to communicate with the external services, and it protects everything. It forms a firewall for your house. It also supports a variety of applications, and one of them is called this EMA application, which you could consider to be the next generation smart meter. The idea is it's not just a meter. It can report to a utility, but the process is entirely under the control of the consumer and not the utility. It's not a utility device. There may also be another meter, and they could just have a dumb meter, old analog meter on the house. It would serve the purpose, but the main purpose is to manage the resources in the house, and particularly the emphasis is on solar and storage. Solar energy is cheaper and better, but it's not getting than anything else. But it's not getting traction because it doesn't fit the institutional business model of the electricity grid and the investor-owned utilities. The last thing that the utility company wants to see is solar panels on your roof. They want to own and control whatever resources you have, and bigger is better. They want giant wind farms, giant solar farms, because they get capital return of about 10% on their capital assets. Anything they invest money in. And as Camilla said, it's also metering networks and these big transmission and distribution, or generation and transmission. That's why they want to pour all the money into that, and they claim that it makes the grid resilient, but it does not. It makes it vulnerable. The only way to get resilience is a distributed system which is what we envision. In other words, having a control system in each home that will allow it to have its own solar sources, its own batteries, and control its own appliances, and maybe communicate with other homes in the neighborhood to share electricity in what we call a microgrid. A microgrid is a detachable part of the electric grid. It's still connected to the electric grid, but could be detached if necessary, or in the event of severe problems. And we see more and more examples of that right now with the failures in the electric power grid, with severe weather events and attacks, and look at what's happening in the Ukraine or even in North Carolina. The grid is being attacked, and so it's not really appropriate anymore. We don't need this huge, complex and vulnerable electric power grid. If we can move as quickly as possible to distributed solar.
Okay, so a beautiful, Tim. Thank you for that. Let's go through in an organized fashion to a couple of things. We want to have a major discussion in a couple of minutes on just what you said about the attack on solar. I know that Mark Roast is with us and has a lot of great things to say. But let me touch on one thing that Camilla and I discussed beforehand. Camilla, you have told me that there are plans to put many, many towers for 5G in Manhattan, for God's sakes. And clearly they're planning to do that in Los Angeles, where I have a daughter who teaches school in Manhattan, and I have a family out here in LA. You're telling me, basically telling us, that we're on the cusp of a major proliferation of huge 5G towers in our major urban areas. And you've also told me that there's an alternative that Tim knows a bit about. So could you, before we get into the war against solar energy, which will really fill the rest of the hour, what can you tell us about this proliferation of these towers? How dangerous are they, and what's the alternative?
Well, first of all, there's the towers, but there's also a proliferation of antennas everywhere, in our homes with the Internet of Things, outside with the coming Internet of Bodies, with the satellites transmitting RF. We're being bathed in this radiation. Now, in New York, they have announced there are about 4,000 a year ago that were announced that are going to be put up there, these enormous jumbo cell towers that you would see normally on the horizon, but they are going to be on residential streets. And they've recently, actually, I'm going to put a link in the chat to a post we did on this a year ago warning about it, but they've now announced the locations, and they've already started to put some of them up. The scale of them is just outrageous. And so, and in certain neighborhoods like the Upper East Side, they're saying, oh, well, there's a capacity issue, but there is no capacity issue. So the only real reasons that they would need this is for surveillance, or for the wireless companies wanting to compete with the cable companies. So the New York City is on fire on this issue. It is so exciting to me because they're really waking up. There are all these community groups getting involved in it and raising money for lawyers. And it's and if it happens in New York, it'll happen across the country for sure. And this is despite the fact that the technology is not the optimal technology. Even Tom Wheeler, who was the former chair of the FCC and also for 12 years head of the Cellular Telephone Industry Association, has said, we must invest in future-proof technology, meaning fiber. And he said, wireless may be a last resort option in the most isolated areas, but it should not be a first resort for most of America. Nonetheless, this technology is still rolling out across the country and getting worse and worse. We did a paper, National Institute of Science, Law, and Public Policy, published a paper written by Tim Sheckley called Reinventing Wires, the Future of Landlines and Networks, that explains the history of how we came to champion a very inferior technology on many, many grounds. over superior technology. And it went through about 12 or 13 different areas where on any one of them individually, you could justify hardwiring over wireless. Now, it's not just the health issues. It's the energy utilization, it's the speed, it's the reliability, it's the value for the money, cybersecurity, all these many different areas where from a technological perspective, this technology makes no sense. So if people want to read that paper, it's called Reinventing Wires, the Future of Landlines and Networks. And Tim can talk a little bit about, Tim wrote the paper, and I worked very closely with him on it. But Tim, do you want to say a few words about
Well, wait, I want to clarify one thing.
Uh-huh.
You said in Manhattan, 4,000 towers? Is that right?
Yeah, here, I just put a link in the chat. And so far they've just, they put a few up. They've just announced 18 locations in Carnegie Hill, which is kind of stupid of them because they're a pretty educated group up in Carnegie Hill, and they're really rising up against this. And, on whatever grounds they can, whether it's historic preservation or other things. Right now, under the Telecom Act of 1996, Section 704 of that act has some language snuck in at the last moment by lobbyists for the telecom industry that prevents governments from resisting antennas on health or environmental grounds.
Right.
So they can't be.
That was
that's gotta
Clinton and Gore,
change.
by the way. That was Clinton and Gore.
That's right.
It was Clinton and Gore.
That's right. And that's got to change. There are two real core issues here. And one is that, and the second is the fraudulent exposure guidelines that the FCC puts out that are completely non-protective, and they get away with it. The science going back on this, it goes back to the 1940s. And I have a post I can put in also of like the government studies. I mean, like about 10 different government departments and agencies have published studies over decades showing the harmful effects in great detail. Yet they've allowed $1 trillion wireless industry to emerge, and it's now integral to our economy and jobs, and we've made some mistakes and we need to reverse it, and we need to hardwire. And Tim, maybe you would want to say a few words about the hardwiring necessity.
Yes, Tim, and then we're going to go to Mark and Eric, who have not yet spoken, and then Mary and Mimi. So go ahead, Tim, and Mark is quite a technical expert as well. So tell us, please.
Well, we published the Reinventing Wires in 2018.
Yeah.
It's 4 years ago, but at that point, what the main emphasis of it was to push the idea that forward that everybody in the United States should have a fiber optic access directly, a gigabit fiber, and that is. If it's not fiber, it's not broadband. And that's the slogan of the Fiber Association. And I firmly believe that. And that's what the paper, really the main thesis of the paper. I never envisioned it could actually happen this quickly, but it is actually happening. And it's happening because of the COVID pandemic in part, but it's loosened up a lot of federal money. There's many billions of dollars being put into it right now. Interestingly, mostly in rural areas, because those are the completely unserved areas all over the United States and here in Colorado. Whereas cities, urban areas have had this mediocre wireless service and a lot of competition from cable companies, and with also inadequate service, but they still have some service, but the rural America has had no service, and now they are getting the fiber first. So that is great news. But we still need to get the fiber to everybody, and it should be locally owned and controlled, not owned by corporations. It's a public utility like a water and sewer service. It should be a public utility.
So as with electricity, which we want to come from solar and wind, and go over wires in microgrids, it's a parallel situation with the EMF and 5G and that and that wireless service.
Yeah,
Go to Myers.
my next paper will be, one of the next papers will be reinventing electricity.
Yeah, okay, very good. Mark Roast, go ahead, please.
Thank you. So Timothy, is the equipment that you talked about ready for production? How much capital would it take to produce and start deployment? And somewhat differently, can a given installation support sufficient solar on the roof and on canopies over parking and driveways, plus storage is needed to to meet all the needs of both building and vehicles associated with it? And can it tap weather forecasts and accommodate varying demand from users? Like say, okay, I'm going on a trip, I want the car full. Because the other assumption here is that all cars get converted. We don't wait for turnover, fleet turnover. We convert the existing fleets and we use solar at half the price and batteries at a third of the price of what they are today to make this thing become a gold rush.
Well, all of the things you ask about are true. I mean, those are there is plenty of capacity or rooftop space available to power everything. Although,
I mean, your equipment, will your equipment manage it?
And if it's properly managed, yeah, it has to be managed, and that's why our emphasis is on a control system for all of this. The EMA system I mentioned earlier is for specifically to control homes, buildings, and microgrids.
And when could that be in production?
Well, we have prototypes being built as we speak, and it all depend on money. This is not a business venture on my part. This is the theory behind it is based on open standards, international standards by ISO and IEC, and many of the parts have already been approved. Some more parts are being written right as we speak, and prototypes are being built to test it out as we speak. But how fast it will roll out depends on funding, fortunately the Department of Energy is putting some money in, a lot of money, billions of dollars, into underserved communities and Indian tribes and in the West, and that will be the test bed for making this work. And the rural electric associations are very supportive of it, as opposed to the investor-owned utilities, which supply 70% of the power in this country. They are against it.
Wow, very interesting.
So your grant that you're hoping to apply for, that you're in the process, is for 12 million. Where will that get you?
Well, that will get quite a number of communities working on this, operating with microgrids that are solar microgrids that can prove out the technology. And the second part of the strategy is not just open international standards, but non-proprietary open source software to make these EMA controllers adapt to virtually every kind of conceivable appliance that might be in a home or a building, and manage energy according to the needs of the user. That's the theory behind it, and we want to stimulate an open source market, just like the Linux operating system has been so successful based on the same model.
We want to. I put my email address in there, and we're doing batteries and solar breakthrough technology. So I'd like to work with you and coordinate with you on that.
Okay, you guys, great. Connect.
Hey, Army,
yes.
can I interject for a second? Timothy,
Yeah.
Please read your chat. I've got an important message for you. Thank you. That's all. Go ahead.
Who?
Timothy, that was just on.
Oh, okay. All right, very good. Timothy, there's a message for you in the chat.
Okay, I'll try to do that and talk at the same time if I have to.
Well, you can talk and chew gum at the same time. Okay.
Somebody save the chat.
Eric Lazarus, you're a New Yorker. Go ahead and jump in, please. Eric, are you unmuted? Yeah, go ahead. Okay.
Hi. Okay. So the question is, besides the actual solar panels on people's roofs, what else is needed to make a microgrid? Can you kind of just give us like 60 seconds on what the rest of the technology? Obviously, if you don't have power locally, nothing you do is going to make it, independent. But besides the rooftops, what else is what other components are there in a microgrid? Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Well, there's the home, your home or building, your appliances in the whatever you have, your solar panels, your batteries. Those are the vital components in the controller. And then the neighborhood. The important part of a microgrid is a community. And so it's got to be a logical grouping of homes and buildings. What we envision with the Emma system is probably around 30 houses or maybe even more, but that's an optimal size because it requires cooperation to make a microgrid work. You have to have cooperation between the people that live there. There has to be some kind of community basis for it, and that's why these good place to try this out is in the some of the communities in the Southwest, particularly Indian, the Native American communities there, the tribes have no, a lot of them don't have any service, but they have a very strong sense of community. So,
I live on a cul-de-sac. There are 12 houses, 10 Jews. So I should have a pretty good chance, right?
Yeah, and it's working out in Puerto Rico too. There's a group, the Interstate Renewable Energy Council is sponsoring some microgrid development in Puerto Rico because that's been such a bizarre debacle down there with the original investor-owned utility and the very bungled implementation of their power grid. It just shows
what you're
that
saying here, real quickly, what you're saying here, this is really interesting, and I've never heard this before, is that we could do microgrids simultaneously with electric supply and with cable, right?
Yeah, well, with fiber.
Fiber. So that has not really been, I have not seen that discussed. It's a very interesting segue there.
It brings together telecommunications and electric power. Those are basic utilities, and interesting enough, the utilities that are putting it in are the rural electric associations that are owned by their customers. They're not investor owned; they're owned by the customers, and so they don't have an incentive to make money off of them. They have a strong incentive to supply good source of power and communications, and they have the rights of way for all the electric lines already. And they can easily string optical fiber in those in their territories. So that's a perfect place to start.
That's an amazing breakthrough. To talk out, if you're still on the call, for the indigenous, that's a big deal. I had never heard that discussed before.
Tim, how is what you're developing, Tim, differentiated from, say, the microgrid at universities like University of Colorado or others? What's
the original term microgrid, it can mean a lot of things. I mean, but the ones that go way back many years are campuses. That's a logical place for a microgrid. And so whether it's a university campus or a corporate campus, the best examples, MIT has a microgrid, UC San Diego is a well-known one. Even here in Boulder, the University of Colorado campus is a microgrid in a sense. They can detach it from the power grid and they have their own independent power plant, but it's not all solar at this point. It's just a conventional microgrid, but it's a larger microgrid. But ideally, it's a smaller community. Like, and we've seen most of the experience in microgrids have been on islands, on remote communities, and say in Alaska or Canada, or places where they don't have a connection to the electric power grid or a good one. They have to augment that with local power. And so that's where they developed it first.
Excellent. Follow up. Real quickly, then we go Mary, Mimi, Justin, and Ron. And then
would we be wise to
go deeper
Would
in.
we be wise to put them in places where there's often a lot of storms so that the press will cover that these places never lost power? It would seem like a very important use case to say, oh, look, if you have these microgrids, now you're resilient against this heavy weather that you had. Does that idea make any sense? Thanks so much.
That's exactly what's happening. Yes, in fact, that was during the Storm Sandy in New York. There were some communities that had that, and they stayed up. There was, the state of New Jersey had the most at the time, the most rooftop solar in the country, but most of it was grid connected directly, and it was not microgrids. It was not self-supporting, and the people did not have access to their solar power without the power grid operating. So people don't realize that those solar panels are useless unless if they depend on the power grid.
Amazing. Mary, Mimi, Justin, and Ron, and Wendy. Mary, are you unmuted? Sorry, Mimi, I'll unmute you. Justin, we still have 68 people on the call. Very, very interesting, Timothy, really powerful stuff. Camilla, will you have an organization for people to connect with that you could put in the chat, or have you already?
I will.
Yeah, please do put it in the chat. Okay, Mary, real quick, please. Mary Butler?
Yeah,
Yeah, go, please.
I just, on a quick point, so I wanted to bring up is, number one, these 5G towers, it's strange how they just pop up and they don't even ask the community if they want them there.
Right.
And then,
Same as
when
nuclear.
we talk about microgrids, we got to find a language that makes the power companies not attack us. And the language should be things like, hey, if we create microgrids, you don't have to build transformers. Instead, all of our homes are your transformers. And you can still make money by being the person that has to service all this electronics to keep our micro community working.
All right. Very good. Thank you, Mary. Interesting. Mimi?
Thanks, everyone. The issue with solar is that it doesn't make enough money, and all renewables, it does not make enough corporate money. So no, but that's true. That's why
Absolutely.
That's why Governor Newsom killed it. And also something I mentioned yesterday, which is so important. I didn't hear anyone say this today, but we can no longer use the wording green energy because that includes nuclear. So we have to say renewables, renewables, renewables all the time. And a quick update in California solar is that 3 environmental groups have asked for a rehearing on the horrible NEM 3 decision. There was a great article in the in the LA Times, and I'm trying to find a free article I can share with all of you because I haven't. It's in the chat. Someone already put it in the chat. Okay, thank you so much, Ron. I was looking for a free article because I have Apple subscription. So thanks, everyone. That's all I.
Yeah.
And so sorry. Just one more thing. So Newsom, he's all talk on the environment and the utilities. I mean, he killed the Clean Air Initiative, right? I mean, so he doesn't give a darn about clean air in California. And now he's done this with solar. I mean, it's just so shocking, everybody. So I know several people who would not vote for Gavin Newsom because of that. Thank you.
You got to hand it to California. They simultaneously extended the life of Diablo Canyon, which could easily blow up and wipe out the whole state. And then they in the next breath killed rooftop solar. Total.
I'm so sorry. So I didn't want to confuse anyone. That was Prop 30 in California. That was the Clean Air Initiative that Democrats were for, Republicans were against, and Newsom were against as well. So it's just made him, I'm sorry, I can't think of another word. It's made him very cocky and it's very annoying. I mean, he's one of these greenwashing politicians. So thanks, everyone. I'll end my rant there. And thanks for that link, Ron. I appreciate it.
You're 100% right. And now we're linking the safe energy movement with the EMF movement. Extremely important. Camilla, we're really glad you're on to do this with us. Justin and Ron Leonard.
Hello, thank you for coming on, Timothy. One of the things I wanted to raise, besides the fact that my bosses are involved both in the critique of the Stanford MIT resiliency study and also setting the renewable portfolio standard for California, or at least helping develop it, is there's a concept of last mile service. That's the thing that essentially has always been the complaint of any infrastructure provider is, oh, we don't want to stretch out to the end. So it's nice to say that we are helping the indigenous tribes and those in rural communities with fiber again, because that actually is a hearkening back to the telecom as it used to be over 100 years ago, when we felt that everybody actually deserved a level playing field in society. So I'm glad to hear all that. And what I wanted to ask about is your interest in, say, other kinds of issues of cities and public-private partnerships. Like Google is wanting to build a microgrid, but they're wanting essentially San Jose to pay for it. And so what do you have as far as ideas for how communities can do this from the ground up and sort of take a little more initiative rather than be in the passenger seat?
Well, that's a real good question. I don't think that this should be that we should rely on private corporations to do this, for profit corporations. It's not going to work. That is, these microgrids particularly have to be based on a community, some kind of common interest, a community basis, and that's why I like the rural electric associations, because they're based on that concept. But the Google, there's no way these private corporations have one purpose, that is to make money for their shareholders and their management. That's their primary purpose, and they are never going to do this correctly. I don't think the fiber should be owned by and operated by them. I do not think that the electric power should be. That's not the way to raise capital.
Okay. Ron Leonard. Ron is one, Camilla and Tim. Ron is one of our great experts on solar, and has been in the solar business for a long, long time.
Tim, might you want to talk about net metering? And we discussed that earlier today. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, let Ron, Camilla. Yes.
Yeah.
Well, Ron will touch on that and go to Tim.
Okay.
Right? And you guys should
Sorry.
meet. Okay. Go for it, Ron. Well, you're not, all that hoopla, you're muted. Hold on, man.
Okay.
All right, there you go.
How about now? So I think we're mixing apples and oranges. So when we're talking about microgrid, I did my first microgrid in 1975. This guy called Edison, he did the first ever microgrid in Manhattan in the late 1800s. Microgrids are not a solution. It's just an action that you do when you move electricity around. The solution that we're talking about, that is a solution, is distributed energy. And however that is used, you can create microgrids out of it. But I'll give you the California example. The distributed energy that occurred from 1.5 million solar roofs in California, some of them with batteries, were used in a virtual power plant by the manufacturers of the battery systems and saved the California grid twice last year in 100-degree temperatures. So all these technologies are here now. We don't have to reinvent anything. We don't have to create anything new. It exists, it's here. The problem that we have in terms of implementing this at scale is that initially, if you wanted to sell power on the grid, you had to register as a utility. And one of the people that registered as a utility, because they got pissed off at a state, which was Georgia, not letting them on the grid, was Apple Computer. And others have followed that, including Tesla, who registered as a utility in Texas to combine battery systems and sell power back to the grid. So all this exists. The solution is here. We don't have to reinvent the wheel. We just have to implement. Now, what we're talking about in net metering is the really nasty portion of what's occurred when three utilities, I think it was three, might have been four, in California got together a slush fund of $7.2 million and educated the California Commission on what should be done with net metering, which in effect seemingly was to make it go away by decreasing the cost of reimbursement for any electricity that goes back on the grid from your solar system on your roof that you paid for. You give it back to them at 5 to 8 cents. They get to sell it for 33 cents. Does that make sense? Don't think so. That's neither fair, equitable, or smart. And the last portion of it is a recent ruling. The California Public Utilities Commission wants to have 4 more gigawatts of new capacity to ensure grid reliability of renewables. That's in addition to the 11.5 gigawatts procurement regulators ordered in 2021. Well, on one hand, you want more renewables. On the other hand, you're killing any more renewables that you can get on the grid because California now produces 10% of its power from solar rooftops. That's an enormous number. That's
It's
just
a real
enormous.
standout. It's so clear. Here on the one hand, the CPUC last month slashes a deep knife into the back of rooftop solar, and then they turn around the next month and they say, we want 4 more gigawatts of solar, but we don't want it on rooftops. We want corporations to own it, not people with their own roof. It's so clear and so obvious, like what Mimi said. Tim, I think chew in here to what Ron and Camilla, what Ron has put out.
Well, I don't want to get in an argument here. I'm just
You
going to,
can, it's okay.
I'm going to say something that what you guys have been talking about is the big grid, what I call the big grid. The problem with the grid is that it needs to be broken down into smaller pieces. It's too complex and it's never going to work this way. You're never going to run it the way that it's this is being conceived, because the problem is that the investor-owned utilities do not want to see rooftop solar anywhere. If they did, it would be owned controlled by them. I think that every solar array, whether it's on your roof or anywhere else, should have a battery and should be focused on self-consumption and not selling power to the grid.
Okay, let me ask you a question. Do we have, and Camilla, you're probably the one to answer this, do we have a parallel microgrid movement in 5G, in telecommunications, with the decentralized solar movement? Do we have a parallel tracks here?
Yeah, that's what fiber is all about.
So we should piggyback the fiber movement onto the rooftop solar movement and the microgrid power movement. Yeah.
Yeah, the fiber and this form of power I'm talking about is basically giving it back to the user, to the people, not to the corporations that are trying to colonize it. And what is happening, is that the solar people, it was too easy. Net metering made the solar installers happy because they could just go out and put these cheap inverters on houses and solar panels and walk away and to sell 100% of the power to the grid under a net metering tariffs. The problem is that makes solar the most expensive form of energy. And that's what's limiting solar right now. So we need to get rid of net metering and phase it out and go to self-consumption.
And are you talking about batteries
for every solar installation? And maybe we'll structure some of it into microgrids if it works, if it's appropriate for the local situation, or maybe not.
Are you advocating that every home that puts in solar also puts in a battery?
Absolutely.
And I've heard, I'm going to go back to Ron in a minute, but I've heard also, I had a conversation with someone that's telling me they're very optimistic about getting rid of lithium and cobalt and making batteries with sodium. Is that realistic?
You asking me?
Mark is giving us a double thumbs up here. Mark, do you know something we don't about?
Yeah. We started with sodium. We have been exploring the sodium battery, and we've now gotten to the point where we're going to be testing solid state batteries, and we're trying to get our hands on some titanium or nickel mesh or expanded metal to use. And I think I found a lead for that to use to improve the results and actually have a breakthrough. And we're looking at $48 a kilowatt hour for batteries. But guess what? If they're made in the United States with North American materials, there's a $45 per kilowatt hour subsidy. So that makes a net cost for the batteries of $3 a kilowatt hour. And then we're looking at 20 cents a watt for the solar instead of 50 cents to $1.
Camilla, did you want to jump in on that?
No, I let Tim talk about batteries.
Okay. All right. So we've got
Yeah,
to.
let me comment on it. I think the
Let Tim-
battery technology is moving really fast. It's very exciting. And I think we're going to get rid of these rare materials that are so controversial. I think we're going to have a good battery business down the road here soon.
So if we can integrate cheaper batteries using non-exotic, what's the term for non-exotic? Common materials for batteries, and segue that or piggyback that with the telecommunications grids, that takes us to another level, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does. And I think that we also have to take a very hard look at this emphasis we're seeing on large scale generation and transmission. I am really feel very much opposed to the idea of large wind farms, large solar farms, offshore wind farms. I think these are bad ways to go. Nuclear power, same problem. It's all about the big bucks that these corporations want to make, and they don't want the power to the people.
Ron Leonard, did you want to jump in on that? Wait. Ron, hold on. You're muted. Sorry. Okay.
So let me agree with you and tell you the facts. The Federal Energy Regulatory Commission years ago put out a wonderful graphic that shows where you put a unit of fossil fuel into a generator at the central power station, and by the time you get it to the last mile to your house, only 20% of that energy that you put up there enters back in your area as electricity. That's 80% waste. We cannot run a system that way. It makes no sense. That's what distributed energy is all about. We can put clean energy producing product, typically solar, in the load zone, create energy cheaper than the fossil fuel plant did way back there with no waste, and have the grid more equitably used for everyone. So this is not a fantasy. This is what we are doing. This is what we have the technology to do, and the numbers prove that we're right.
100% with you. And if we can have clean, cheap batteries that don't use exotic metals, that use common metals, and have locally generated electricity and microgrids for telecommunications on as part of that grid, then we're in a brave new world. Is that right?
That's logical, and it makes economic sense.
Tim, you agree?
Terrific. Yes.
Okay, great, wonderful. Hey, we've solved the world's problems, and we won't have any more. No, we'll be back again next week. This has been a second hour. We don't have to break, Steve. We can just keep it going. As long as you let me know how long you want to keep going, because we've got hands galore.
I'm completely embarrassed. I gave my host powers up to Tim, and I've been trying to talk to him in chat. So Tim Schuley, is that how do you pronounce your last name?
Exactly.
Exactly. Yeah. I
Caleb,
don't
do
know.
you know how to open a participants list?
I saw your message.
Yeah, do you know how to open a participants list?
Yeah.
So go ahead and open it and find my name, and 3 dots next to that, select make host.
Find your name.
Yeah.
That's
And-
Steve
and you-
Caruso.
Yeah, or
We'll
Steve
get this solved
Engineer.
and we'll continue. We're going to continue this
Steve Engineer.
discussion.
It's embarrassing.
That's all right. Do we have a dog barking in the background somewhere? Okay, we're not recording now. So can you, if you can reopen the recording, that would be great. If you,
Well,
Tim,
I
if you
can't
can-
do anything because I'm not host. Oh,
Okay,
there you
now
go.
you're
Thank you,
host.
Tim. Very good.
Tim, you
I
need to
am
make
now. I'll
Steve-
reopen the recording. It's been live on YouTube this whole time.
I didn't know how to do that. Yeah.
Okay. Well, to be honest, Tim, when Camilla said we were having Tim on, I thought it was going to think, oh, there we go. To be honest, when Camilla said we were having Tim on, I thought it was going to be Timothy Leary. I was really excited, but you've been pretty good. So we'll continue, and we'll continue recording here. We have a lot of people with hands. Dr. Ruth Strauss has not spoken yet. Dr. Ruth, are you with us? We still have 54 people on, so we're going to keep rolling here, and it will be recorded. So watch your language. Ruth, you have special permission to curse in Yiddish. I know you can, so go ahead.
Anyway, Schmendrick, that's what the
Schmendrick, okay, we got that.
I went, putts would also fit, but anyway,
Go for it.
I went to that CPUC, hearing, and, there were like 120 people who spoke for solar and against nuclear, one guy who was, for a combination, and you see what happened. They voted completely against what anybody, wanted and what they heard. I mean, it's just craven. But this would be for California people. We need to organize. Wendy has a comprehensive list. We need to organize to let Gavin Newsom know that his, pretty boys campaign for president, which is exactly what he wants. We just have to let him know that we don't have his back about anything, and that we've got a national organization, which you have done, Harvey, and that, we're just going to make sure that we tank any of his aspirations if he doesn't play ball. And that's it.
Yes, well, there you go. And frankly, I want to get to his hairdresser and get him to look really bad. That would end this.
No, your wife does a much better job. You don't look greased back and slick.
All right. Wendy, then Mark, then Tatanka, and then Jeffrey. Go ahead, Wendy.
Thank you. I'll try to be quick. I have just a couple of points. I want to just really quick make a couple points about 5G and then pivot back to solar again. But here, and this is just kind of anecdotal, but here in South Florida a couple of years ago, and I'm in the flatlands, right? So if you go up on an overpass on the highway, you can see for miles. And I remember specifically, yeah, it was about just 5 years ago or whatever. And I just remember stopped at a light on an overpass, and I just look in both directions, and all of a sudden I just see 5 different 5G towers out of nowhere. They just popped up. A lot of them are by schools, they're everywhere. And it's, there's no vote on this. And, at the time I was volunteering in an observatory. I have some knowledge of radiation and what these things do and the damage they can do to DNA. And it's just not talked about or studied. It's actually demonized, and they have all these celebrities promoting 5G, but nobody ever has a fair discussion on the actual damage that it can do to your genes and the cancer causing and all that. And I walk a lot. I'm a pedestrian, and I'll be in neighborhoods. And in the last few years, just correlated, at least it's, happening at the same time anyway. I'll be walking down the street and I'll see a bird or a squirrel. Biggest was a couple, and it was a couple of them, a couple of big iguanas together. And they'll just be frozen with their mouths open, their eyes wide open, just dead on the ground with no point of impact. And it's really frightening. I've been seeing this, and just to put that out there to, run with that information. And to pivot back, And I know with like Biden's climate and like infrastructure stuff, he has a lot of money going to 5G and nuclear under the guise of climate. And so the money is already positioned to go to these monopolies, which just goes back to net metering. And again, being in Florida, where a couple times we've had ballot amendments to create frameworks for microgrids and just regulatory frameworks that other people could start businesses. And I'm totally against like P3s and monopolies, but another idea might be, you know, investment from, say, the Infrastructure Act and things that like Mark Roost is doing, and maybe create like startups where you can have microgrids that are owned by like publicly by the people, but also by smaller companies that are creating competition in the market and creating like, and just decentralizing the monopolies. And I think that that could accelerate the whole use of microgrids in the first place. Because if you just leave it to the government, I don't know how fast it would pop up. But that's just another, you know, again, it's the monopolies and maybe just starting in with the people again. So thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Mark?
So
Very good.
We've talked about today a nice range of things that are actually complementary, overlapping, and all in the same direction politically. What
What is that? What is somebody banging?
That's my computer. Sorry, that's my computer going, the hard drive is dying. That's what that is.
Oh.
I can't change it. I would if I could.
I don't know if we can understand you.
Okay, I'll try it a little more slowly. I'll try it a little more slowly.
Very quickly, and then we'll move on, because it's hard to understand them.
Okay, so the basic idea is that nearly everything that's important in the economy has a better way to go or a better way to do it, and is progressive politically, or it could be progressive politically. So we can actually be thinking in terms of a grand alliance along with and as a meta form of the specific alliances that you were talking about today. And not only that, but if we succeed in our technology, we'll be able to fund everything else, because the profit margin is so high if we're in competition with the existing industry, because our costs are so much lower than the existing industries.
Okay, very good. Thank you, Mark. And we'll take up a collection to get you a new computer for next week. Okay. Thank you. Okay, Tatanka, go ahead, go for it.
I just want to thank Timothy for showing up, and for Wendy for organizing it, and for everybody.
And Camilla is who brought Timothy on.
So. Camilla, that's it. So yes, back to the big picture. The big money, the Davos people, they're the ones that want the large scale, and they want to drag out the whole process of owning the entire energy grid of the world into the Biden plan of, you know, carbon zero. We should be talking actually about climate restoration, you know, back to pre-industrial levels, but to get us to carbon zero by 2050, in which case the storms and all the weather events we're experiencing now will be, we'll just be laughing at how small they were. The smart meters, I remember years and years ago, I was part of a small collective, myself and two other people, helping people if they couldn't get the damn smart meter out from right outside their bedroom or in an apartment house, to get out of the cancer cluster immediately, because there are cancer clusters everywhere where you're close to 5G. And that's what the smart meter uses. The other thing about the smart meter is that the size of the wavelength of it is something like the average size of an insect. And with all the not just the antennas on Earth, but all the space stations, the goal is to have antennas have the 5G transmitted from space to cover every square meter on Earth. Wouldn't there be no escape? Okay. And it will fry the insect world of Earth. So we're looking at a major health crisis to humans, but to all forms of life on Earth. You know, imagine all the bees gone, etc. So this is, once again, when we marry all these things, which you've done so well, Harvey, bringing in the 5G with the distributed energy. We need distributed energy. That's the form of democratic control. The big fight is with the big money, with the large utilities, the large energy grid. Gavin Newsom has got his finger in the air and he's made his decision, and we have to undo that. It's all about the control of our lives, the autonomy of our lives, and a future of, humanity on the planet is, it's that big. The election protection issue and the energy issue are two sides of the same coin. So we're all in the same place. I'm really happy for everybody who continues to show up, and we're here on purpose, and we have a big purpose. And I'm glad you put together this new national organization, Harvey. We'll all be here next week to hear about it.
All right. Thank you. Thank you, Tatanka. We will, by the way, at some point in the next couple of weeks, we're going to get a new link. We have brought into a 1,000-person capacity Zoom setup. We will be able to offer Wendy, Mila, Mike. We'll be able to offer small groups the ability to have a conference calling, and we will be switching our services in the next few weeks. And we'll give you ample opportunity. We'll let you know in advance. But this national organization is going to continue to build, and hopefully we can impact the 24 election. Mary, Mimi, Jeffrey, and Justin. And Steve, I don't know how much longer you want to do this, but I'm happy to stay as long as people want to. Still 47 people with us. Go ahead, Mary. Mary, are you unmuted?
Yeah, I just wanted to bring up this micro communities. My building code reform, it's actually basically mandated that all structures be designed to be self-sufficient in of themselves. So it forces all communities to start building microgrid communities, because it states to build anew, you must meet certain requirements, which is know the natural disaster environmental history of a region and build in accordance with it, and it must be sustainable in of itself. So that means it's got to clean its own gray and brown water and create natural gas waste, as well as any other waste that can be used to create bio.
Okay.
Bio. So
Mary,
I hope that everybody that's looking to this bio universe think about that. I've laid the groundwork to change building codes to make it mandatory.
Okay. Mary, you're breaking up or something, but very good ideas. Thank you so much. Appreciate it. Mimi, go ahead.
Thanks. Is Timothy still here? I see him. Yes, please. I was wondering why were you against like the offshore wind farms? I believe it's Denmark. They're setting up a wind farm that'll power their whole country. So is it the destruction of habitat? What is it that you don't like about them, please?
Well, for one thing, the sun shines in everywhere that people live. Solar should be the first choice. Now, the problem with offshore wind farms particularly is the acoustic emissions are very damaging to the environment, to all marine mammals that depend on acoustic communication. We have a lot of examples of that. That's another area that I've been done a little bit of work on, technical standards for acoustic underwater communication. And
everywhere now.
And there's a lot of science on this now, the severe impacts of the
They pop
noise
up
that's
everywhere
being
now,
made.
don't they, lately?
The noise being made by these construction jobs,
Yeah,
but
because
also
my
there's
chair
the
in the
principle
bedroom.
I'm sorry, Timothy, I
Someone is
can't
talking.
hear you.
Someone
Yeah,
is
go
talking.
ahead. Just repeat the last sentence or two you said kindly. Sorry, everyone.
Yeah, the there's a lot of science on this and acoustic research and noise, the impact of that on marine life, and but the biggest issue I think is the size of these things. This is about making money for large corporations. It's not about powering the people or the communities. It's about big money. And that's why they're building, you don't need it. The environmental cost is staggering. And even the land-based wind farms, some of them are as much as 5 megawatts. You don't need a tower that big. You don't need that kind of big infrastructure, because it also requires huge transmission investments. And the transmission is vulnerable and expensive. And here again, it's a capital asset for big corporations to make money off of the people.
Okay.
It's not the right way to go.
Is that worldwide? Because I'm pretty sure it was one of the Nordic.
Worldwide. It's
Okay.
worldwide. There's no reason to do it.
Thank you.
Okay, Jeffrey, very quickly. Thank you, Mimi. And then Justin.
Is the Peru guy still here? That's what I want.
The Peru guy.
No, he just stepped off. Sorry. He's
Oh.
Cuban, actually.
All right. But
Okay.
I do have one other point.
Very quickly.
I hope. First off, I hope I can get the because he didn't seem to didn't understand my question about the democracy and all that in Peru.
Fine. Okay, go ahead then.
And secondly, I know Cancer Alley. Until we find a way to end it, we should at least use it to find a cure for cancer.
Okay, that's a good point. Thank you.
Is that a good idea?
Excellent. Thank you. Justin, we're almost done here. It's almost 4:20. 4:20 is the time that everybody leaves and goes smoke a doobie. So
Right. It's 4:20 somewhere.
Yeah, in LA it's 4:20. Go ahead, Justin.
All right. So an interesting connection to what you just talked about. I live in the Salinas Valley right now, and there are a lot of large wind towers that are used by the large corporations, ironically, because the grid is already so unreliable, they need it for their pumping. But they're also working with other agencies to figure out where to distribute all this energy, hopefully locally. And one of those is a battery system that's quite large, built by the city of Gonzales. Yes, public power still is a thing. So the what I'd like to do and keep my main activity on is advocate in local governments for them to take more leadership position over things from energy efficiency to, like in cities, this is a big deal, multi-tenant management, that you can't put solar on your roof because it's not your roof. You can't put it in your parking lot because somebody will complain about the hazard or the aesthetics or something like that, right? So we actually need not just individual home solutions, not multi-state, huge long runs of wires that go out when a fire happens or a storm happens. We actually need community-based, and that a lot of times has to start with city councils getting religion on these things. One of the last things to mention about all that is Humboldt County is facing a near $1 billion cost of just running more copper wire for the existing systems. PG&E wants to underground that and multiply that cost by many times over, which basically means it will be forever that no new homes can come in, and it will be by permission only that new businesses can come into that county, basically killing all economic growth. So this is something that's not a pie in the sky. This is not a fantasy, right? This is stuff that really needs solutions now. And so agitate your local officials.
Thank you. Thank you for that, Justin. It is 4:20. And Camilla, I want to thank you for joining us. I hope you'll come back and you should be in touch with Dennis. Dennis and Camilla, Dennis has a great radio show and it goes all over. So I'll send you both a joint email. Timothy, Mark, all you guys, thank you. Eric, Dorothy, great to have you on as always. Thank you, Steve Caruso, for engineering. Again, we will in the next few weeks have a new link, and we will have the ability for 1,000 people to come on and have Wendy and Mila and others be hosts. So I want to thank Ruth Strauss and Mila in particular for their incredible work on trying to save the Pacifica network. I can't even begin to tell you what's going on there. Maybe at some point, Dennis is crying his eyes out here. At some point, we can explain it. But it's like when you have COINTELPRO and the corporate and Blackhawk and all these other places converge to destroy an operation. But somehow we're getting it through. Dennis's show again is Flashpoints. It's on the network. Dennis put the links in the chat. It's a great show. Go ahead, Dennis.
Yeah, I just wanted to say we are, just to be clear, we're on in Los Angeles. For some reason, this is what they've decided, Monday and Friday. So if people want to hear us in Los Angeles, but we're obviously podcasted and we're at kpfa.org. But long live Pacifica, one way or another.
One way or the other. Again, thank you. Everybody, Camilla, Dr. Nancy, for giving a lesson to Jeffrey today. That's really great. And we appreciate that. It's always hard to say goodbye. There's still 44 people with us, but it's time to go. We'll be back next week. We will talk more about our national organization. We will talk more about Leonard Peltier, and we will talk more about renewable energy and all that great stuff. Timothy, you're a great presenter. We appreciate it. And Wendy, thank you for grabbing us all. Ron, Leonard, always great to have you with us. And we'll see you next week, everybody. So
Thank you.